Hello everyone, how's everybody doing? I hope you're doing just as good as I am. And we have another show today. And today's the show about Mr. Tesla. Very famous guy. A lot of people still reference him. He was kind of revived uh, in the 1990s. I think even earlier, 1970s, he began to grow again in popularity, especially among dissident groups. You know, no one in mainstream gives a damn about Tesla. So whenever you mention the word Tesla, you know you're dealing with a dissident, and all the dissidents essentially follow him, right? They have a good opinion of him. Well, I'm going to have a different opinion today. I don't have a very good opinion of Tesla, and I hope to justify that. But before I do, I want to I want to review a little bit of Nassim Haramein, the guy I talked about last week. And I don't think I'm finished with him. So I want to discuss a little bit about him because there were a couple issues that popped up relating to what is science. Okay. And so let's look at this. Someone put a comment. I guess it was someone from his organization, I would think, right? And he puts this comment. He says, I have studied your work, and Nassim has delivered the art crystal. Whoa, the art crystal. And also something called the vortex coil technologies. I am working with these technologies, promising results. Okay. And then he goes on to say that you seem to be stuck in the word spell, that the one great energy has been convoluted with by so many names. I find no practical, what is it, uh, applications for your work. And maybe a, what is that, definitionary, I guess he meant to whatever. And he said, just what do you bring to the table is, that is in a practicable, pragmatic, right, aspect. Well, these are mighty words. They're mighty words because a lot of people have the same perspective on what science is. One of them is that you don't do word wizardry, you don't do word games. Let's just go to the lab and do some experiments. Let's get on with it. Let's get on with physics, right? And the other one is experiment itself, right? The fact that they have an idea that experiments have something to do with science. And I say first that you can't do science without defining terms. So that definitionary, uh, these are people who think they can skip definitions and move on to the lab to do experiments or whatever, to explain their theories even. And you cannot explain a theory unless you define the crucial words that make or break your theory. They have never learned this. And I'm going to go with an example today, especially on the famous word energy that everybody uses and nobody defines or knows what it is. Then the other issue, again, is experiments. Do experiments have anything to do with science? And yes, we have, and that's why the subject is relevant, because Tesla was an experimenter above all. He was not a scientist, and there is a difference. That's what I want to discuss today. Anyways, what did Mr. Nassim, does he do science or does he do experiments? Does he do lab work? Is he selling something? Is he manufacturing? Is he inventing something? Or is he trying to explain how the universe works? These are two different pursuits. You got to put them in the right context, okay? Well, here it is. He developed a little device, okay? Little, I don't know. I don't even know what it looks like. Didn't bother. And he says this is what his site sells, okay? Cells of resonance-based technologies are a way to tap into the vital source of quintessential energy. Ooh, that has been identified as the source of the material world, called quantum vacuum energy. Aha. And what does it do? Replicating the magnetohydrodynamics naturally occurring in a variety of astrophysical objects, which couples plasma modes to the harmonic structure of the quantum vacuum. The harmonic flux resonator, HFR, right, replicates and transfers quantum energy. Whoa. We don't know what energy is, but he built a device that transfers energy to you. Now look at that. Really, it blows you away, right? What does it do? It links with a non-local entanglement network. I like that one. And energetic dynamics of the quantum vacuum. Okay. So he's got a little device, some little thing that he's selling. And it turns out that he's been selling this at least since, what is it? Well, I think he first time he came up with this was 1997, but here he is in 1999, 20 years ago, that he's been peddling this little device. Okay, he gave a presentation at the San Francisco Tesla Society. Now, why do I have Tesla? I know this guy Tesla somewhere. I don't know. Very important guy. By the way, the San Francisco Tesla Society hasn't put anything in their site since 2015. So I think it's been defunct for 4 years, I suppose. I don't really know, okay, but I suspect it is. And what does Mr. Nassim say in that presentation? Well, he says the following. This is one of the things he says. Keep an eye on the wording, okay? Because like this other fellow says, words are not important. Let's find out. Here he says, especially I like that first one. He says, space is not empty. It is full. It is full of an energy. So we have space full of energy, whatever energy is, right? That creates and organizes all that there is, a sea of electromagnetic flux, which generates atomic structures. So we're talking about flux, which is not a physical object, energy, which is not a physical object, and those two create an atomic structure, something that apparently is a physical object. And then he shows a little proof, evidence. That's the first thing that usually mathematicians try to do. They don't work on explanations. They work on persuading you, on trying to convince you, on trying to recruit you. And so for this purpose, he's got to present, evidence. That's what you do to a jury. You present, the prosecutor presents evidence in order to persuade the jury to vote for his side of the case, okay? Says, it was not until very recently, however, that the true identity of the so-called empty space has come to be confirmed by experimental study. So we're going to confirm this empty space or whatever's in there with an experiment. Okay, let's find out. The experiment was the first to conclusively demonstrate the Casimir effect. And as some of you might know, Casimir effect is simply two plates. You remove whatever's between them, and the pressure from outside pushes them together. That's essentially the mechanism, the one that the de Hilsters also use for their particle model, okay, that I discussed a couple of weeks ago. Okay, confirms the existence of an energy embedded within space, the energy density of space. He talks about the ether, and then I like the last line there, last paragraph there. Thousands of years prior to our written history, there was an apparatus present on this planet capable of activating a link with this all-prevailing energy. Okay, so our Egyptians and Mayans and whatever ancestors, they already had all these devices that tuned into the vacuum energy, right? Unfortunately, cataclysmic events culminating with a meltdown of the last ice age, combined with a passage of time resulting in the loss of this higher body of knowledge. This is typical of a lot of dissidents, that they believe that our ancestors, that they were smarter than us. And don't get me wrong, okay? Let's put it in the right context. Were they wise? Was Gautama Buddha wise? Was Jesus Christ, if he ever existed, was he wise? Mohammed, was he wise? Wise, perhaps. They knew how to behave in society, or otherwise God would punish you. Who was God? Society. So you had to behave in society or society would take care of you. That's how it worked. And these people were wise in that sense. They had some experience after many years, and etc. And so, yeah, they were wise. One thing is to be wise, and another one is to be able to explain how the universe works. And you can go to any old book, the Tao of, of the ancient Orientals. You can go to the, what is it, the Gilgamesh story there of the Indians. You can go to the Bible, and you won't find an explanation of how gravity works, how light works, what magnetism is. In fact, I don't think they knew about these phenomena such as magnetism maybe that far back. Maybe they did. Maybe they did found a lodestone, but nobody really wrote about all these things, okay? So they had no idea of these mechanisms. So when we talk about knowledge with quotations, we have to separate wisdom. These people were wise because wisdom is something eternal in a sense that you finally learn how to behave in society or society takes care of you. God punishes you and keeps you in line. That's one issue. But that's different than saying, can he explain, how why this pen falls downwards? He can't. And so we're talking about knowledge of this sense, and what Nassim Haramein is saying. He's saying our ancestors tapped into this energy in the vacuum, and then we lost this knowledge over the centuries. Now we have to develop it back again or invent it back again, and he's the point man. So if you want to buy a little Kool-Aid, well, you can go with Mr. Nassim, okay? Okay. What does Nassim talk about in that same article? Well, you'll see that he mentions here and there, right? He mentions energy, right? He's into energy. You'll see the word energy a couple times there, and of course you might ask him, well, Nassim, what is energy? Could you tell us? And remember that if you're going to use energy as a physical object, if you're going to transfer it, then you can't define it. You don't define a table. You don't define the word chair. You don't define the word tree or the word rock. You point to them. You point and say rock. And now the person understands what a rock is. The ET that came from another planet understands what that word refers to. He relates the sound to what you pointed to. And then he says, okay, he learned the first word, the word rock. Okay? And that's the way we present objects in physics. Concepts you must define. And so the question is energy a physical object or is it an abstract concept? Well, they define it as a concept, and you'll find several definitions there. Most of them will say something, the capacity of, or the ability to, okay? And capacity and abilities are properties, are attributes. You don't move around. You don't move love around. If love you define, you can't say, well, love is a piece of an object, a three-dimensional object that I can move around from here to there. You don't move love. You don't move grace. You don't move intelligence. These are concepts. So if energy is a concept and you define it as the capacity to, blah, blah, or whatever, the ability to, then clearly you cannot use it as a physical object in the next sentence and say, I'm going to transfer energy. I'm going to, like Nassim says, I'm going to tune into the energy in the vacuum. What do you mean the energy? I thought energy was a concept. Are you also going to tune into the love that fills the vacuum? Are you going to tap into the love, to the intelligence, to the knowledge that's in the vacuum? So you're misusing your terms, and that's why you really have to define your words very specifically when you move into science. A lot of people just bring in a lot of the terms of ordinary speech, and they want to just introduce them directly into science, into the science dissertation, the science environment, and just keep going with it. And when you stop them, they say, oh, Bill, you're doing word wizardry. You're harping too much on language. Yeah, of course. We have to harp on language. You absolutely need to establish the language so we know, especially whether you're dealing with an object or a concept. Okay? And energy is a concept. And a lot of people, including Mr. Nobel Prize Richard Feynman, Dick Feynman, he didn't know what energy was. And here he is. He says, see if we can move him over here. And he says, you know, it's important to realize that in physics today we have no knowledge of what energy is. Well, that's because, Mr. Dick, energy is not a what, it's not an is. Energy is a concept. And that's why they can continue searching in circles forever and say, what is energy? Well, it's a concept. It's like saying, what is love? You can only ask that question in physics, in the scientific environment, only if it's an object. You can say, what is a dog? What is a log? Those questions are valid. You cannot say, what is intelligence? Not in science. Science, you have to define the word intelligence. You have to define the word love, the word life. Nobody's defined. So energy doesn't have a physical attribute. Energy is a concept. It's like the word work, the word force, the word time. You cannot say you're going to warp time because there's no such physical object as time. You're misusing the language when you do that. And people don't really understand that. They think they can get away with that kind of language in physics. Okay, so we don't have a definition for energy. So whatever Mr. Nassim does, this tapping into the energy that fills space, it's all nonsense. Obviously, it's nonsense. It shows that he's not doing physics. Okay? Now, he's trying to sell a device. He's trying to sell a little gadget there. Yeah, fine. If you want to go out and buy it, go ahead and do it and tap into the energy, whatever that is. Get more energy into you. You know, I recommend you just eat. Okay? And in this, just to show you, you know, where Mr. Nassim is, as far as science is concerned, on this same San Francisco Tesla Society talk, he discussed something else, and this puts him in the right perspective for you. Okay, so keep an eye on this. He said the following. Okay, he talked about the circles, the crop circles that popped up in those days all over. Especially they started in England, right? And so he's suggesting that extraterrestrials made them, maybe with their flying saucers, landed on there and burned the field or squashed it down. This could only have been done by ETs, by the Klingons, or the Martians maybe. And he says experts blaming naturally occurring vorticular winds. I like the words he used, vorticular winds, for their creation. Others were proclaiming the mysterious crop drawings to be monumental hoaxes. And he's offended by this. What do you mean hoax? It's for real. He says the articulation of the intricate geometry of the glyph clearly demonstrated the intent of the designer to deliver a message, thus obviously condemning the naturally occurring wind in the crop's hypothesis. So it wasn't the wind, according to Mr. Nassim. What was it then? It seems difficult to conclude to a hoax. It's not a hoax. Okay? Much more could be said in favor of the authenticity of the crop circle mystery, and he never did. In other words, he insinuated, read my lips, it's not a hoax. It could have been done by man. I'll let you figure it out. And the reason he did that, he didn't want to, he's a guy who's in between there, the establishment and trying to carve a niche in the dissident market. And so he's got to be careful. He doesn't want to piss off all the establishment guys and say, oh, you believe in flying saucers, UFOs, that kind of thing. So, no, I didn't say that. I'm just saying that, this had to have something a little more out of the normal, out of physics, kind of, and you figure it out on your own. Well, let's show Mr. Nassim what he missed. Okay, and here If he would have read this in those days, he would have figured out how to make a crop circle. Okay? It says first you prepare a detailed drawing. Keep it simple. Circles and triangles are relatively easy to make. Advanced curves, spirals, straight lines, fractal, la la la, and pictures can take a long time to mark out and work. You will need helpers. Decide who will do what and in what order the image needs to be constructed. You will need a marked rope or a 100-foot measuring tape to mark out the site, and a foot-wide wooden board about 4 feet long to do the flattening. The board should have ropes attached to each end so you can loop it over your neck. Ask permission from the farmer. Maybe that happened, maybe that did not, I don't know. Wait for a moonlit night. Mark out the field carefully. And then put the rope around your neck with the board on the ground in front of you. Press down with your right foot, move it forward and press it down again, and so on. Leave the field the same way you entered. Hide your tracks. The way you hide your tracks, according to these people, is you walk through where the tractors went through. You know, that in that region, or you step on the what is it? On the same corn that you fell down, because when you step on it, you leave no marks, right? You leave no tracks. And here we have a couple people who came out and said how they did it. These two gentlemen came out many years later and said, look, we did this. And they explained how they did it, and essentially as I just described it. Okay, so they drew a little map. Their wife, one of them, helped them 6 months later when she found out he was missing. They went out there and they started, making the crop circles. Okay. And you can see them stomping down on the corn or wheat, whatever that is over there. Okay. And a lot of people like this, they started doing their own crop circles. Here's another group. This one is in Germany. And they built a pretty good, sophisticated, pattern out there in the field. They measured and they went in there. They started, pressing down on there. There's a faster way. They say they invented this little machine that just rolls all the way down, okay? So this is what Mr. Nassim had trouble understanding or figuring out. This guy's supposedly a physicist. He couldn't figure this thing out. And that kind of makes you wonder, how much he really understands about all this stuff, okay? The other thing Nassim talks about, as you saw in earlier, as I explained earlier, is that, the ancients had all this knowledge, had this fascinating knowledge, and we lost it over the years. And so he gives examples of that at that speech in San Francisco. And he says, look, he says the following, okay? He says, accordingly, if the universe is truly based on a specific fractal geometry, and since we are part of the fractal system, a lot of fractal stuff, sounds intelligent, sounds scientific, right? One would surely expect evidences of the geometrical grid and mathematics to emerge out of the most advanced societies throughout the ages. So what is he talking about? He's talking about our ancient forefathers, maybe 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. They had to come to terms with some of this mathematics. I mean, after all, they built the pyramids, right? You can't deny that that was done, 3,000 years BC. That's 5,000 years ago. So the guy who came up with that apparently had a pretty good idea about mathematics and architecture, at least I would say, right? I think we have to hand it to him, right? And he says, thus my research journey brought me to examine many past cultures, such as the Mesoamerican civilization, Egyptian runes, hieroglyphics, Chinese doctrines and mathematics, Hindu traditions, and Hebrew text. Okay, so what is the issue? He's like Von Däniken. He's not saying it was done by extraterrestrials. What he's saying, it was done by our ancient cultures that had developed mathematics to unprecedented levels that we later lost over time. Okay, so what does he say? And I think this speaks for himself. For him. What did he say about the Egyptians? Okay, here you have it. He says, could the temple of, and there's a temple there in ancient Egypt, have been built by an advanced civilization of great antiquity, which used sophisticated laser power to leave us an imprint of their higher knowledge. Indeed, it is believed that this is the very temple under which God which the god King Osiris, right, was brought back to life by the magic of his faithful wife Isis. Was Isis magic the result of a technology based on a crystalline grid composed of 64 tetrahedrons, each creating a spherical electromagnetic field interacting with a hyperdimensional boundary within the vicinity of the device and tapping into the source energy, thus giving her the powers to regenerate cells? My God, this guy really believes this stuff. He believes that these people had, all this technology at their disposal. Here's the Mesoamerican. He goes to Tiahuanaco. By the way, I've been to all these sites that I'm going to be mentioning here. This was in Bolivia, okay, Tiahuanaco. We call it the La Puerta del Sol. And he's the ancient Bolivian city of Tiahuanaco, where enormous stones and intricate water channels leading to a pyramid are found, that the local traditions told that the whole city appeared suddenly in the course of a single night, and that the rocks were carried through the air to the sound of a trumpet. At Uxmal in the Yucatan, where numerous pyramids are found, a Mayan legend asserts that all they had to do was whistle and heavy rocks would move into place. Now, this guy believes all this stuff. He's using these as an examples of how these people in the old days had all this advanced technology. In Egypt, ancient tradition tells us of a magician capable of raising a huge vault of stone 200 cubits long and 50 cubits broad. Approximately, was the magician related to Thoth, the Egyptian god known as the Great Lord of Magic, who could move objects with the power of his voice. Were all these references to sound relating to the movement of heavy objects a hint to a technology which used resonance to create gravitational fields? I mean, look at what he's saying. And he goes on with one more example I'll just give here. He's got more examples in his speech, right? But was the Ark of the Covenant a hyperdimensional technology left in ancient Egypt by a very advanced society thousands of years prior to our written history, where the so-called sun gods, found in almost all the ancient traditions around the world, members of this advanced civilization? And were they called sun gods? Not because they worshipped the sun, but because the center of their power was a highly luminescent crystalline object. I love this guy. I really love. He really believes all this stuff. You got to hand it to good old Nassim that he really believes in all this stuff. He's a Von Daniken type guy where he goes out there and looks at ancient history and then thinks that all this is done with supernatural powers. Now, supernatural powers that, if you apply it to those days, become supernatural, because he's saying, well, they did it with lasers. They did it through the hyperdimensional whatever. They tapped into the energy. It's all nonsense. But this is what Nassim believes. And now he's got this device he's had for 20 years where he's going to tap into this energy. He's going to revive the technology that our ancient forefathers had, and he's going to sell it to you. Okay, well, this leads us into good old Tesla. Mr. Tesla was he a scientist like Nassim claims to be, or was he like Nassim is, a guy who develops a gadget and then peddles it? Well, anyone who read a little bit about Tesla knows that he was an inventor. He was an inventor. Was he a scientist? Well, for this we have to know what a scientist is. What is a scientist? What is science all about? And science, here you have my definition, okay? I put it on the line, I put it up front. You can argue with me, but then if you don't argue and you bypass it, then I'm going to bring you down to the definition back again. So you better fight the definition while you still have a chance before we go into the conference room and talk about what science does or theories or whatever else. And science is rational explanations. Rational explanations. It's divided into two branches: physics, philosophy. Okay? Philosophy deals with concepts, and it tries to explain reasons and purposes. Why did Julius Caesar go to England? That kind of question. Those are scientific questions. You're trying to explain something. Or you can explain things of psychology, sociology. All those are part of science, but they're under what we could call the philosophy branch. That's what I call, that's what I call that branch. The other branch is physics. What does physics deal with? Well, also rational explanations, but of what? The bread and butter is the object. You need objects to do physics. You can't do physics without an object. That's the starting point. Next step is that you have to define what an object is for the purposes of physics. What does physics purport to explain? Causes and mechanisms. So now we have an idea of what science is and how the world of philosophy differs from the world of physics. And if you look at those definitions strictly, there is no room for mathematics and there is no room for doing experiments. And a lot of people say, what are you saying? You're saying we don't do experiments in science? No. We don't use mathematics in science? No. And people get very upset because, well, you're a crank, you're a crackpot, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. It follows from the definition. Rational explanations. All we have to do is define the word rational and the word explanation. Okay? I'm not going to go over that because I went over that in other videos. But that's what science is. Rational explanations. Did Mr. Tesla, did he give us rational explanations? Or did he give us, like Nassim, a gadget or gadgets? Well, here's a quick video, GIF, that puts Mr. Tesla in the right perspective, okay? Tesla was an inventor. That's what he did. He invented stuff, okay? And that's his Tesla scope, but he had several inventions, okay? He allegedly patented over 200 inventions. And here's a little picture, just a very quick synopsis of some of the things that he patented. These are, I've taken these directly out of his patents. Okay, so these are just pictures. And what do we have there? Maybe 15, whatever. He patented over 200 patents. That's what he had. So what did he dedicate his time to? Inventing, doing maybe some experiment to tweak some of his inventions, writing them, and then submitting them to the patent office. That's essentially what Tesla did throughout his life. And of course, he had opinions about physics, okay? And he was asked about that. And what he thought about science. And this is what he said. In other words, they asked him what was his most scientific thing that he was into, okay? And see, we asked Tesla which arena of science most appealed to him. Tesla answered, rotating magnetic fields. Well, obviously, if he used the word field, he had no clue about science, because field is a word that is taboo in science, in physics. Okay, we don't use the word field, we don't use the word energy, we don't use the word mass. These words are not part of physics, they're part of mathematics. Which I call mathemagics because they explain everything with magic. These words, first, are undefined, and second, they're concepts, and you can't move them around. You can't move a field around unless it's a, football field maybe. You can't move energy around because it's a concept, so you can't move it around, and that's what the mathematical physicists, so-called physicists, purport to do. And so if Tesla talked about fields, he was not a scientist, okay? It means he did not zero in on the mechanism that Mother Nature uses to do her gravity and her magnetism and etc. He was just an inventor, a guy who developed gadgets in the lab, had a good knack for them, he had a good intuition for that, but that's a far cry from being a scientist, a guy who can explain how Mother Nature does gravity, how Mother Nature does magnetism, electricity, light, etc. And he said, this was dear to my heart. It was not only a valuable discovery capable of extensive practical applications. That was his whole thing. Practical applications. It was a revelation of new forces, of new phenomena unknown to science before. Well, it looks like it's still unknown to science even after Tesla, because we still, at least mathematical physics, they still don't know what all this is. Tesla was also important to note because a lot of dissidents who are field guys and wave guys, they may not know that Tesla was not a field or a wave guy. He was a particle man. Okay, Tesla's a particle man, and this came out of that same interview. He says, "This strange, many-sided man clings to the opinion he expressed in his scientific investigations published from 1896 through 1898, that the source of all rays we know is always a stream of tangible particles or corpuscles." Okay, it's interesting to note that Ken Wheeler theory hypothesis. He quotes Nikola Tesla. So does Eric Dollard, by the way. And these people have Tesla as their hero. And turns out that this guy is not a wave guy. He's a corpuscle, a particle man. And there he says why. Rather than waves or vibrations, Tesla expressed his belief that radioactive rays, again, he uses a concept called rays, beams, were of this sort, a view ridiculed at the time. When radium was discovered, it was found actually to emit particles of matter. What is he talking about? Particles. Flying nuclei of helium atoms called alpha rays. Tesla has maintained ever since that radium is not a generator, but a transformer of energy. So Tesla was using words such as energy and field. He didn't vouch apparently for the wave. He was a particle man, and quantum, in a certain sense, confirmed or reaffirmed his notions, even though he disagreed completely with quantum and general relativity. Let's state that. But he was a particle man. He just believed in true Newtonian corpuscles, classical corpuscles. Okay, but he was a particle man. And so a lot of people have problems with that because they say, well, I love Tesla. Yeah, but did you know that he was a particle guy? You're proposing waves. And Tesla did not. So it's important to keep that in mind. The other thing is that obviously, if Tesla was using words such as energy, field, and well, particles, if he was referring to corpuscles, well, that's physics. But if he was referring to what quantum says is a particle, a vibrating field, bundle of energy, then it's nonsense. Okay, but yeah, Tesla was using the same language that Einstein was using. He was using the same language that all his enemies were using. And that's the issue today with dissidents. They're using the same language as the mainstream. Okay, you take the D. Hillsters, you take Eric Dollard, you take Ken Wheeler, you take all these fellows out there that are fighting the establishment. What do? Walt Thornhill and his Electric Universe, they all do the same thing. They're using the same vocabulary, the same language that the mathematicians use, the people who they criticize. And the problem is language. We have to erase all the language in the last 400 years. We can't keep using the word energy. We can't keep using the word force, field, time, charge. There are no such physical objects in physics. And until you learn that, you're going to continue accusing me of being, oh, you're doing word wizardry. You just do a lot of semantics. Yeah, of course, because it destroys their theory. That's why. That's why they don't like it. You have to define your terms before you give your talk or give your definitions at the beginning of your talk so that people can follow your presentation. So if you say energy, you say, well, what is energy? Well, energy is this. Okay, now I understand it. Or you point to it and say, energy, that's what it is, that thing there in front of my finger. Then people can relate to it. Okay, that's what he's going to move. That's what he's going to transfer. That piece there, that thing there, that three-dimensional ball or gas or whatever. Okay, so you have to define your terms. And obviously, Tesla was like most people. I think Robert Hooke, also in the 17th century, he was a practical guy. He was a guy who did experiments. He liked to experiment, go to the lab and do stuff. And I think Tesla was exactly like him in that sense. Eric Dollard's another guy that does the same thing. They like to go to the lab. And these people are good with their hands, terrible with their minds, because they don't realize that science, especially physics, is armchair physics. The scientist does not go to the lab, ever. He doesn't have to. And he doesn't have to observe. Blind men can be scientists. You lay back, and you think. And you try to visualize how Mother Nature does her magic tricks, her invisible magic tricks. That's a scientist. The guy who goes to the lab, he's a technician. And he said, oh, look at this little effect that I saw. Yeah, you saw, but you can't explain it. So if you can't explain it, you're not a scientist. You're just a gawker. You're just a person who is deluded into thinking that because you can describe what happened, you can measure and you can put it into an equation. You still haven't explained what caused it. How did Mother Nature do that trick? That's the trick. That's what you got to figure out. How the magician did his trick. Not say, well, the magician, cut the lady in half in two pieces. He took 20 seconds. He took 10 strokes of the saw. Those are numbers. That's a description. You still haven't explained how the magician did the trick. That's where science, really vibrates. Okay. Okay. The other problem with Tesla, and he's a nauseating guy as far as his self-aggrandizing. Okay. This is just look at the way he talks. Okay. We can still see him many years later. What is it? 90 years later almost. And this is from 1930, and he was always making all these incredible predictions of what the future will bring, and that he was the guy who came up with all of it. He was always patting himself on the back, giving himself kudos. And he said, but I had similar filamentless gas-filled electric lamps in my laboratory in Houston Street over 30 years ago. And he said that he was far ahead of his time. And what does he do? He says the passage of electric current, again showing that he did not understand electricity, because current is already something that is in motion. The word current represents flowing something. And he says the passage, the flow of electric flow. That's essentially what he's saying. So he had this idea as a particle man that electricity was the flow of electron beads from atom to atom, as quantum holds today. Everybody's got this idea that that's what electricity is, compared to the rope model, where it's a bunch of shells, electron shells, which are merged and they twirl in place. So the electric current under the rope model is a serpentine that twirls in place, and that's why it has this torsion effect. That's what electricity does have. And so there is no flow of beads as Tesla believed, or quantum today. And again, he says, I made discoveries many years ago. He constantly boasts about all his achievements in every interview. That was 1930. You got that date there. Now here's 1931. And this is another interview that he had. And he says, I positively expect that within the next decade, new sources of energy will be opened up, which will put at the disposal of mankind everywhere power in unlimited amounts. He was a free energy guy. I have made a discovery which I expect to announce soon. Okay, that was 1931. He's going to announce it soon. Okay, keep that in mind. That's 1931. Here's 1935. Okay, let's see what he discovered by then. Here's an interview in 1935. It says Dr. Nikola Tesla is shown here as he was being interviewed by the press on his discovery of an apparatus for transmitting energy to any distance. He kept the details secret. And he boasted that he discovered a new apparatus for transmitting mechanical energy without wires and to any distance. That's 1935, okay? And remember, this is just before the war and before we had the nuclear bomb, which developed in the 40s, okay? And here's 1937, 2 years later, okay? 6 years before his death. And again, he's boasting. He says that he would win the Pierre Guzman's Prize of the Institute of France for his discovery. He's got all these discoveries, right? Relating to the interstellar transmission of energy. My God, he's going to be transmitting energy to the stars, to the Klingons, okay? I am proud of these discoveries because many have denied that I am the original discoverer of the cosmic ray. I was 15 years ahead of other fellows who were asleep. And then he says, from me, the credit of, now no one can take away from me the credit of being the first discoverer of the cosmic ray on Earth. And again, he uses the word energy. Energy in considerable amounts can now be flashed through interstellar space. In other words, he's talking about free energy. Okay, and calculations and claim he wants to claim the Pierre Guzman Prize of 100,000 francs for means of communication with other worlds, feeling perfectly sure that it will be awarded to me. And he says he wants to receive, not to be rich, but for the great historical honor of being the first to achieve this miracle. I would be almost willing to give my life. I'm just as sure that prize will be awarded to me as if I already had it in my pocket. They have got to do it. It means it will be possible to convey several thousand units of horsepower to other planets. And this discovery of mine, he kept boasting and boasting and boasting about, all the things he had been boasting now for at least 8 years, if not more, of all the things he invented, which he kept secret, right? And this takes us a little bit to this myth. It is a myth where when he died, the FBI, CIA, whoever, they went through his pockets. He was living in a hotel, I guess, and they went through his things, saying, "Oh yeah, the U.S. government stole all these secrets and now has them in the military or in Washington somewhere." It's like the Roswell thing. It's the U.S. government keeping us from seeing what happened. What happened was these Martians, these Klingons, whatever, they came to Roswell, and the U.S. government got a hold of them. Now they have mummified them. They're studying them, and they're learning from all these fancy technologies from them. It's all nonsense. I mean, it's talk about flat earthers. That's as flat earth as it gets. And what happens? All these people, such as Tesla, all he did was boast a lot. Look at Ken Wheeler. He's got the same mentality. If you go to his site, he's just a guy who brags and brags and brags, just incredibly long about how he's developed all these things. He's the creator of these new things, and he's gonna pass them on to you. He knows that someday he will be given the credit. And sometimes, unfortunately, I have to bring John Baez's crackpot index and apply it to him, because in his case he absolutely deserves it. And so did Tesla. He was talking nonsense. Tesla didn't invent anything after the 1898, or the first maybe decade of the 20th century. He had a fight with Marconi, which he lost in court. Politics, really, because in the 1930s Marconi had to go back to court, or his company, because the U.S. government said that none of the patents were his, that Marconi was claiming money for, because supposedly the U.S. government used them during the First World War. And they say, oh, by the way, these inventions are not yours, even though they had assigned them to him in the fight against Marconi, against Tesla. So, that's just politics. That's, religion, law. It's got nothing to do with science. Did Tesla come up with good inventions? Yeah, and I think the main one is alternate current. These things, you got to hand it to him. But that's got nothing to do with science. It's like Thomas Alva Edison, another contemporary of his. Edison was not a scientist. He was an inventor. And more, he was a manager. He liked to do experiments in the lab. He had his people do things for him. He managed that quite well and created his company, General Electric, right? And was he a scientist? No. When Edison died, he still had no idea what electricity is. He had no idea what light is. He used electricity. He developed the gadget, but he didn't understand the nature of electricity. And that's what science is. And that's where all these people get confused. They think that because they can invent something, that's a certification of their knowledge, of their theory. Computers prove quantum mechanics. GPS proves general relativity. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. General relativity doesn't, GPS does not prove that general relativity is correct or even incorrect. GPS only proves that the guy who uses that as an argument doesn't understand the difference between science and technology. GPS was developed through trial and error. Okay, and so were the computers. Computers were developed over a long time. I worked in the chip industry, and they were developed over a long period of time through trial and error. You did one thing, it went wrong, then you tried another thing, and so on. Does any person who works on GPS, does any person who works on computers today, designing, etc., do they know what a magnetic field is? Can they tell you how gravity works? Do they know what electricity is? Of course not. None of them know. And you get that not from me. You get that from quantum mechanics. You have people like Richard Feynman. He says, they've given up on trying to understand how the quantum world works. So they don't understand. In fact, I wrote a paper this morning. It's in Quora. You can look it up. Where I discuss this. I show that, these people had no idea and still have no idea of how the quantum world works. And still we have the gadgets, we have the inventions, but we don't have the understanding of what these invisible things that Mother Nature uses to do her daily work are. We have no idea of this. So just to finish up here, let me just put the foundations of physics so that in science, so that we don't confuse science with technology or with math. We don't need math. If science is about explaining a phenomena, what purpose is there for an equation? What use do I have for an equation? Here's the pen. It falls to the floor, right? I let go, it goes down. Do I need to know how fast it went? Is this necessary for explaining the mechanism? Do I need to repeat the experiment a million times to make sure it's repeatable? No, I need to explain it. That's it. How does Mother Nature do that magic trick? Here's another magic trick I always do. Two magnets, right? They stick together. You can see the little magnet, the black dot in the center. Do I need any math to explain this? Do I need any equation? Do I need to know how fast one is attracted to the other? No. I don't need to know how many instances the magician used to saw the lady in half. Yeah, he did 20 strokes. Does that give me an idea of how he did the trick? If he took 20 seconds, did 20 strokes, cut her in two pieces, does that tell me anything about the magic trick, about how he did the magic trick? Do I need any mathematics, any equation? Do I need to repeat the experiment a million times? I just need to see it once and say, well, how does this work? And I need to sit back, do some armchair physics, and try to visualize what Mother Nature has between those two magnets. Then I can figure it out. Okay, then I can say, okay, is she using particles? Is she using waves? Or is she using the rope model? Okay, so here we have foundations of physics for those who are interested. Physics requires an object. You can't do physics without an object. And all these people are doing physics with concepts. We've been doing it with concepts for the last 400 years, since the days of Newton. They've been doing it with concepts. Now, people like Newton and Christian Huygens, all these people, they still use particles, but they were talking about real corpuscles. In that sense, they were doing physics. Their mechanism didn't work, but they were doing physics because they were moving objects around. Today, the word particle has taken on totally different meaning. Today, the word particle means something totally different. It means a vibration of a field or a bundle of energy. What is a field? What is energy? Well, we don't know. We're still investigating. So yeah, we have a problem because these people are moving concepts around. Okay, and yeah. If physics requires an object, we have to define the word object or the word something, the word thing. We need to know what that is for the purposes of physics. Something is that which has shape, and nothing is that which doesn't have shape. They are antonyms. One is the opposite of the other. Now we can use these words consistently in science. We can say, okay, if this is something, this is nothing. What is nothing? That which doesn't have shape. And now we can find synonyms such as space, vacuum, nothingness, zip, any of those, and then, we have to define the word concept so that we know the difference between a concept and an object. Concept is a word that invokes or embodies two objects or two words which are treated as objects. Very important clarification there, okay? Distance, separation between two objects. We don't measure distance in science or in physics. See, these people talk about not distance, not length. They talk about distance traveled. They tell you how long the table is. They say the length, and they measure. What are they doing? They're unrolling a tape, a predetermined standard, or they're counting tiles, or they're clocking it. All these are dynamic. Measurement is a dynamic process, and so distance of mathematics is really distance traveled. In physics, it's just separation between two objects. Length is the continuous matter in an object. You know, a table. We don't look at what the table is made out of, how many atoms. We don't count each atom. We say, you know, the table has a certain length from one edge to the other edge, from one surface to the other surface. Done. That's it. That's what length is. Location, you have to have, if you want to have location in the universe, you know, within matter, really, it's just the distance that you have to every object in the universe. So if we take any atom, any hydrogen atom, we look at the separation from that atom to all other atoms in the universe, right? That's its location. That's its physical location with respect to all atoms in the universe. It's straightforward, okay? That's location in physics, okay? It's not, you know, a X and Y. It's not a ordered pair. It's not a pair of coordinates. That's not location. What the mathematicians call position. That has nothing to do with physics. In physics, location is physical location. What is your location with respect to the rest of the atoms in the universe? If God wants to have location, all he's got to do is first be an object and then have a distance between his chest and my chest. Then God has existence by definition, not because I believe in him, okay? And if God is not an object and there is no distance between my chest and his, well, God doesn't exist by definition. Okay? And then motion, two or more locations of an object. An object occupies two or more locations. By definition, it is moving. So now we have definitions that form the foundations of physics. We can use these words consistently to give our presentation. People can follow it because they can understand each word. We don't bring in spirits such as energy and field, the vibrating field. No, we don't use any of these esoteric spiritualist terms, not in science. Okay. Okay, with that, I'm going to continue with perhaps another dissident, expose these so-called dissidents and show that they're no different than the establishment, the mathematical establishment. Everyone who criticizes warp space, everyone who criticizes black holes, Big Bang, he's on the right track. That doesn't mean you're going to join the electric universe. You're going to join Ken Wheeler. You're going to join the De Hilsters and their John Chappell Society. You're not going to join Tesla or even Maxwell. That's a guy who I should maybe tackle next because he was not a scientist either. Maxwell was a mathematician. All he did was measure and calculate. He had no explanation for the mechanics of how Mother Nature does her invisible work in reality, which is a different thing than describing mathematically and saying, oh, here's the equation. This is what we observe. This is how fast light travels. You know, those things don't give us an insight into how Mother Nature runs her daily shop. Okay, so we'll see you, what is it, on Wednesday? And, oh, before I forget, on Tuesday, we have JFGariepy, I hope I pronounce his name right. And we're going to be talking about a little different subject, a little bit of spying maybe, a little bit of what I did in my youth, prison. We might be talking about diversity, anarchism. I think that's the topic of the day. I still don't have quite clear exactly what he's going to ask, so I'll be surprised just as anybody else. I'll be improvising, so that's good. and extinction. Where are we headed? And I say we're headed towards extinction. we're dead. We'll see you on Tuesdays. On Tuesday, for those who tune in to JFGariepy and the Public Spaces program. And on Wednesday, I'll see you again with another dissident. We'll see you then. Bye bye.